For me, my family and Temple Sinai have played two different important roles in my life. Ever since I was little, I would always look forward to seeing relatives on Jewish holidays and enjoying warm meals together. The different cultural traditions and foods have influenced my Jewish identity, from my grandfather's babka to my grandmother's matzo ball soup. Being able to take that culture that I have grown up with and combining it with what I have learned from Temple Sinai has helped me gain a better sense of understanding and connection to Judaism. Temple Sinai has not only taught me more about Jewish values in Hebrew, but has taught me about the value and importance of Jewish community. I've gotten closer to so many people over the years at Temple Sinai and feel part of the community here. When I joined in middle school, Temple Sinai helped me prepare for my bat mitzvah and taught me everything I needed. It was a very memorable experience because I was able to connect my family to the temple as the first generation American in my family becoming a bat mitzvah. Through this, my family was able to learn and connect to the temple and to what I have learned. Now, we are able to incorporate what we have learned from Temple Sinai into our traditions and combine our culture with prayers and insights from the temple. I am very grateful to be a part of such a tight-knit community that helps me embrace my Jewish heritage. Thank you.
From the first day I walked into Hebrew school 10 years ago, I dreaded having to come to temple twice a week to learn about Judaism. Little did I know that Hebrew school, especially recently, has shaped my life in ways I wouldn't have thought possible a decade ago. Since my family started sending me to Hebrew school, as well as taking me to Friday night Shabbat services and celebrating Jewish holidays at home with friends and family, I've realized that being a Jew is a lot more than singing prayers and eating Jewish food. The rabbi's sermons during Friday night services have opened my eyes to a multitude of important issues and different ways of looking at things I never would have thought about before. An example of one sermon that I remember especially well was a sermon he gave on being kind during Yom Kippur a few years back. The message was clear. No matter what you've gone through recently or what is going on in your life, be kind to others. You never know what someone else is going through, and being kind can truly make their day. Through these sermons, Hebrew school, and practicing Judaism at home with my family, I've learned so many new things about my Jewish identity that will stay with me for the rest of my life. Thank you for listening.
As COVID-19 spread worldwide, life changed. Judaism, which was a constant in my life, became jumbled. Instead of going to Tasty, confirmation class, Nifty, camp, and even Israel, there was Zoom. Now, I have framed this as a completely negative transition, but this is not the case. Diller is an international year-long fellowship for Jewish teens. Unlike most of my past Jewish experiences, in Diller, my cohort of 20 diverse Jewish teens from the greater Boston area came together to learn and experience pluralistically. The fellowship, with 16 cities in Israel and 16 in the diaspora, has teens with widely different Jewish backgrounds and ideologies. Although the fellowship was meant to end with a 3-week trip to Israel with all 640 teens, we found ways to connect even with the pandemic restricting us to our home and home countries. As a Boston cohort, we spent time getting to know the teens in our sister city, Haifa. We also dove into Judaism and daily life with the cohorts from Johannesburg, Montreal, Melbourne, and all over Israel. Although I was supposed to meet all of these amazing people in Israel, it was still wonderful to have the opportunity to talk to these people from all over the world. There's something special about meeting new people, especially when you're stuck in your house with the same 3 people for months. I enjoy forming deeper connections with new people. I've met many Jewish people through Temple Sinai and the URJ. Meeting these Diller fellows from across the world was significant. Being in Israel altogether would have been a life-changing experience, but this was too. It's not always about the place, but the people. I didn't need to be in Haifa to know the real Haifa. That being said, I still hope to one day travel to these places that I now have a better understanding of, a deeper connection to. I've been quarantined my whole life to a small area around myself, a small bubble of thought. By talking to teenagers alike and different in every aspect of identity to me, I have learned that there is more to seek out in each experience, a deeper understanding and a deeper appreciation. Thank you.
Some of my most important Jewish memories from this year are the Friday night Shabbat service and Saturday night Havdalah service in Washington, D.C. during the Lataken trip. It was very powerful and moving to see so many Jewish teens coming together from so many places and connecting over the same songs. The majority of us knew every song that was sung already, whether it be from camp, a youth group, or temple. Even if you didn't know a song, the Religious Action Center made it so welcoming, and it was very easy to follow along and enjoy the service. On Friday night, we sang typical Shabbat songs, but also learned a new song, I Have a Voice, which spoke about how our voices are powerful and can change the world. It had a perfect message for all of the work we would be doing later that weekend for lobbying on Capitol Hill. Then, on Saturday, we gathered outside the Jefferson Memorial, each teen with a candle in hand, and let go of Shabbat while looking over the water. Being together and getting to sing those songs once more, all together before this pandemic hit, makes me realize how special religion and culture are to me.
During the annual Washington, D.C. confirmation class trip through the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism, my classmates and I had the amazing opportunity to lobby the representatives of our state Congress members about different subjects that we were passionate about. We lobbied about subjects such as criminal justice reform, gun violence, disability rights, and many other topics. Of 3 or 4, we wrote speeches and explained why they should support the bills that we were endorsing. Along with all the other congregations from Massachusetts that were with us at the RAC, we spoke with representatives from Elizabeth Warren and Joseph Kennedy's office. It was a true representation of how American democracy plays out in a once-in-a-lifetime experience.
There are 40 million people that live in a state of hunger in the United States and another 34 million that live in poverty. That is almost 1/5 of the population. It is a strong Jewish belief to help those who are less fortunate. Jewish people give tzedakah, which is giving their extra change to people in need, and they often help homeless people if they pass them on the street. In my personal experience, I have biked in the Ride for Food to raise money for hunger relief, and I've worked at Family Table and JF and CS events to supply for those in need. The problem is that in this country, with our current system of government and capitalist beliefs, we'll never be able to get rid of hunger and homelessness fully. But through many organizations, small and large, we make good efforts to eradicate hunger and poverty. There's so much more we could do. Thank you.
I remember one Hebrew school class, we were talking about the existence of God, and the rabbi said that you don't necessarily have to have a strong spiritual belief in God to embrace Judaism. That resonated with me because I don't consider myself to be an especially spiritual person. And for me, being Jewish is more about being a part of a worldwide community with shared values. God functions in the eye of the beholder, and if it helps someone to think of God in a more literal sense as described in the Torah, then they should do so. I personally tend to think about God as less of a conscious being and more of a conceptual guide. While I don't believe in an all-powerful God living in the sky, I do believe that through God's teaching, anyone has a solid guide on how to lead their life. That's not to say that I think everything God says should be taken 100% literally. I believe the main idea of Judaism, like many other religions, is to live a life filled with kindness and good deeds. Society has changed a lot since the Torah was written, and there are aspects to God's teachings that are bound to be outdated in terms of the societal views of our society of today. I think that it's perfectly okay to reject some of the more ancient aspects of God's teachings, and I think that we're morally obligated to do so by the original mandates handed down by God. Judaism and God's whole purpose is to teach people how to be fundamentally good. As such, it's necessary that we reevaluate some of God's more specific teachings to make sure they fit with the overall purpose of being Jewish. God's teachings provide an excellent guide to morality for all who choose to embrace them, yet they can only be correctly applied to one's life with a healthy dose of critical thinking.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to speak about what it means to be made in the divine image. I've chanted the words B'Tselem Elohim in my Torah portion, which is about the 6th day of creation during Rosh Hashanah services for a few years. And I've encountered the topic once again during Hebrew High with Rabbi Mesler. I find this topic especially meaningful and relevant because I sometimes forget to apply it in my daily life. The Jewish value of being made in the divine image means that each person has a reflection of God in them. A reflection of God could be interpreted to mean that everyone has a part of themselves that is awe-inspiring and powerful in the same way that a higher power is. Therefore, it is our responsibility to use our capabilities for moral purposes, living up to the ideal of the divine image. It also means we are obligated to view all other people as equals, worthy not just of respect, but also of the education and personal support to reach their divine potential. Even though we are all different, we are tied together by the divine spark that we all share.
From the beginning of my Jewish education, it was a family expectation that I would go through the confirmation process, but due to conflicts, I often missed class and was not able to go on the DC trip. Over the last 3 years, every time I stepped back into the building and joined my fellow confirmands, I confirmed that it was important to be there. Not only did I feel better every time I left class, I felt I learned something new about Judaism in the world. While life has pulled me in many different directions, the rabbi's welcoming attitude confirmed for me that my Jewish faith will always be there. The sense of familiarity and togetherness with my confirmation class is creating a foundation for me to feel comfortable joining in Jewish activities during college and participating in a temple congregation on my own in the future. Lastly, this process has taught me many different aspects of Jewish thought and leadership, which will remain an important aspect of my everyday life.
While lobbying in Washington with the Religious Action Center, I felt passionately about criminal justice. However, it was not a topic chosen to be discussed. With everything going on in the world, today it seems fitting to finally discuss the importance of criminal justice. I became very interested and passionate about this topic after the civil rights trip through the Hebrew School when we went to various museums and historical sites in Alabama and Atlanta. Although the Constitution states justice for all, it is still not seen today, and despite abolishing slavery in 1865, police violence, systematic oppression, and racial discrimination against people of color still continues. Some basic examples of the injustices against people of color over time have been lynchings, Jim Crow laws, a biased criminal justice system, and restricted access to the ballot box. This topic is important to us because in the Torah, Jewish people are taught to accept others without any prejudice or bias. This obviously feeds into our desire to help when help is needed and continue the fight for every single person to feel equal and important. As Reformed Jews, we say Black Lives Matter, and one way to affirm that Black Lives Matter is to commit to human and civil rights movements and work to end systematic racism and white supremacy. If you are interested in getting involved and taking action in this cause, you can visit the RAC website for more information. Thank you.
It is said in Leviticus, when a stranger sojourns with you in your land, you shall do him no wrong. You shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. The Torah is constantly teaching to treat all people with kindness, whether you know them or not, whether they are rich or poor, and whether they reside legally or undocumented. There are currently 12 million people who are living in the United States undocumented. In fiscal year 2020, 21 people have died in ICE custody. Jewish people have more in common with undocumented immigrants than most people would think. Jews were once those immigrants and strangers in Egypt. We were scared, needed a home, and for people to help us. People make extreme and untrue stereotypes about us too. Jews are not greedy and control the government, just as immigrants are not rapists and drug dealers. As Jews, we need to come together to help and support undocumented immigrants and refugees who are just trying to find a new home for themselves or their families. Becoming a legal immigrant has become increasingly difficult, with a lot of living and educational requirements, along with paying all of the application fees. How are they supposed to succeed when many of them don't have adequate access to healthcare or a good education? Ways that we can help are demanding that the government apply the Refugee Act of 1980, no matter the political relationship with the country that was fled, suspend deportations of those fleeing El Salvador and Guatemala, ask surrounding congregations to provide sanctuary to other refugees who have fear of going back to their country, and advocate for sanctuary cities and organizations that help immigrants.
Up until now, I've been very privileged in the fact that I've never had a first-hand experience with anti-Semitism other than the occasional offhand comment or inappropriate joke. This was until we were on a trip to Washington, D.C. with the Temple, and we were coming back from dinner at a mall. There was a Bloomberg rally where people were rallying outside for the Second Amendment. This was fine. People can have their opinions, even if they are a bit worrying, but it started getting scary when people started to come out with hate signs that depicted swastikas and other manner of hate towards other groups of people. This was the first time that I truly realized how common anti-Semitism is when you're outside the echo chamber that is Sharon. I believe that my blindness towards anti-Semitism that goes on every day in America and other places in the world may be due in part to the media making it seem as though anti-Semitism has disappeared or gotten better since the end of the Holocaust. But in truth, there are Jews who are being denied service or facing other injustices due to religious practice alone, or religious prejudice on practice. However, if we learned one thing in the class, it's that through history, the Jewish people have bounced back from whatever may be holding us back, and we will continue to do so until we no longer have to fear being targeted due to something so simple as religion.
For me, the meaning of the Holocaust in 2020 is a major part of my Jewish identity. As Jews, we've been educated by concentration camp survivors and secondhand accounts of the atrocities that occurred over 70 years ago. Today, I will not be reinforcing your background information. Instead, I will focus on the legacy of the Holocaust and what it means in our society. Never again, a common phrase stemming from the Holocaust, is used today as a means of making sure another genocide will never take place. Unfortunately, the phrase doesn't live up to expectations. Since the Holocaust, there has been the Cambodian genocide, the Rwandan genocide, the East Timor genocide, and many more. The phrase never again doesn't live up to the hype. From a Jewish perspective, our ancestors have been killed, used as scapegoats, and put into bondage. As American Jews, we have the privilege to use our voice with the intention of preventing another genocide. More importantly, we have the unique privilege to educate other Americans about the Holocaust and its repercussions. According to the U.S. Millennial Holocaust Knowledge and Awareness Survey, 11% of Millennial and Gen Z respondents believed that Jews actually caused the Holocaust. According to the ADL, from 2018 to 2019, there's been a 12% increase in anti-Semitic incidents in America. As Jews, we have the duty to make sure history doesn't repeat itself. As Jews, we can educate the ignorant in our own communities. And as Jews, we have the responsibility to make never again a reality. That is the meaning of the Holocaust today.
The role of Jewish people in the civil rights movement was one of the most meaningful lessons I learned from Rabbi Mazal, and it taught me my role and responsibility in 21st century anti-racism movements. While we learned about this subject in class, traveling to Atlanta and Montgomery on the South Trip in 2019 enabled me and many of my classmates to bear witness to the historic fight for racial justice and equality. Visiting sites such as the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, the Ebenezer Baptist Church, and the Temple, which survived a white supremacist bombing in the 1960s, allowed us as Jewish teens to better understand the role Jewish people played as allies in the civil rights movement. As I experienced this history, I recognized my place in modern anti-racism movements. Throughout the civil rights movement, the Jewish leaders and people who participated in marches, protests, and boycotts exemplify how I should act today. It is my role and obligation as a Jewish person to engage in modern activism alongside Black people as we continue to fight for equality for all.
One topic that we covered, voter suppression and civic engagement, I found particularly impactful, especially with its renewed relevance in these past few months. Early in the year, we examined historical voter suppression in the US, looking at the march from Selma to Montgomery and the brutal and explicit ways people's voting rights were suppressed. We then explored through testimonials how even today, restrictive voting laws and tactics disproportionately harm Black and Brown communities. We also discussed the importance of civic engagement from a Jewish perspective. The Talmud says that a ruler should not be appointed unless the community is first consulted. While I cannot vote, I was amazed and proud at the historic number of votes and voices that were heard this election season. At the same time, staying civically engaged means going far beyond just voting, and I believe all of us here are far more informed and aware of our need to be active on the issues we care about.